guest this week is Brent Adamson. Brent is a world-renowned researcher, author, presenter, trainer, and advisor to B2B commercial executives around the world, known as having the biggest crystal ball in B2B sales. Brent is also the co-author of the best-selling, industry-changing The Challenger Sale and The Challenger Customer. He's also a frequent contributor to well-known business publications, including the Harvard Business Review, featuring his recent articles, Sensemaking for Sales, and Traditional B2B Sales and Marketing Are Becoming Obsolete. Brent, welcome to the podcast. What a pleasure.
Thank you, Kevin. It's great to be here.
Yeah, I'm thrilled. I'm a big fan. I've interviewed your buddy, Matt Dixon, a little way back. So he's
the better looking of the duo.
Well, yeah, I'm sure that's not true, because I think that you're a splendid looking fellow in fine and vigorous health.
Well, if it makes it any better, I'm hilariously funny to myself. So it works.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just don't ask my wife. She's German. Nothing's funny to her. So there you go.
No,
which I find hilarious. So it works. There you go.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, there's a link there, because my family were German way back as well. And yeah. I seem to get on with the Germans. I worked for 2 German software companies and really enjoyed it, actually. That in itself could be a whole topic, cultural differences between countries, different organizations. But it's not what we're specifically here to talk about today. What we're going to talk about in a couple of minutes, we'll get there. Is buyer-centric selling. I am, by the way, a genuine fan of the work that you guys have done.
Oh, thank you.
Those 2 books are just brilliant. A lot of people actually that I speak to in the sales arena are still bigger fans of the Challenger Customer than the Challenger Sale. I don't know if that's a reflection on the work, or what are your thoughts about that?
The numbers don't lie. The Challenger Sale has done, in terms of sales, much better by almost, I think, an order of magnitude. Truth be told, I think the Challenger Customer is probably the better book, but not to say that somehow the other one is bad. But we really had learned a lot about commercial insight and how to build it and how to use it and what it looks like and what it means for marketing and implications for digital. And then of course the whole sort of central character of Challenger Customer is this idea that not all customer stakeholders are created equal, that there are some, and they're not your champions, they're what we call mobilizers, and there's a difference between the two. That really is featured as the central sort of theme of that book. And I find it to be, and also for what it's worth, I think if you fast forward today, so from the Challenger Sale, it's 11 years now since its publication, which is hard to believe. I think Challenger Customer is the more applicable one today, just because there's more room for using that material to differentiate yourself in the marketplace. So there you go. But I like them both. They're like both my children. I love them equally.
Yeah, so that's the right answer. That's the right answer.
Of course,
even if we know it's very rarely
true.
We
always know it ain't really true.
That's right. Absolutely.
I hope my kids aren't watching this.
My youngest daughter used to edit this podcast for me way back when we started a couple of years ago. And so, I'd maintain the same position. I think my favorite depends on how they're behaving on the day and how kind they are to me in any given circumstances.
That's and how much they cry when you try to help them with their math homework.
Well, I'm guessing you may have been a lot better at maths than me. That was never a strong suit. I'm a languages chap. I'm good at languages, and that's probably my gift to the world, which is one of the reasons why I do the podcast. So the other super interesting thing about you is you're not a sales guy.
No, I'm a researcher. So it's funny you say you're a language guy, because my PhD is actually in linguistics. So I went pretty deep into the world of language, and particularly foreign language acquisition and foreign language pedagogy, how to teach languages. And that was going to be my career. In fact, I was a professor at Michigan State University for about 4 years on the tenure track, got about halfway to tenure. And after 12 years of graduate school and 4 graduate degrees and more time and money than I care to admit to, misspent youth, I ultimately decided that a long-term academic career was, for reasons, that's a different podcast, but was not the right thing to do. So I went and got yet a 5th degree, an MBA at the University of Michigan, which is also my alma mater from undergrad, and found this company called Corporate Executive Board, or CEB, which was eventually, about 4 or 5 years ago, actually a little longer, acquired by Gartner. But it was there then that I found a home with as a researcher and as a teacher and a writer and a storyteller, which is kind of what I've done. So that's what a 35 year career. And that's really what I've done my entire career, whether it's language or sales and marketing. I like to research stuff and teach stuff. Matt Dixon likes to refer to us as sales anthropologists, which I think is kind of a fun way to think about it. Yeah.
Yeah, you've spent a lot of time observing salespeople in the wild, haven't you?
A lot, yeah.
You're kind of like, you remember, we have David Attenborough, right, in this country.
Yes,
I think he's pretty famous around the world, isn't he?
Yes,
You're kind of like the David Attenborough of the sales world, aren't you?
That's exactly what I... But it's funny you should say that because I travel around the world, at least particularly pre-pandemic, but still today, I travel around, do sales kickoffs and keynotes. And at CEB, we ran a whole series of meetings. It was about, 50 a year across 3 practices, about almost 150 meetings I would do, so I was on a plane almost every week. And the reason I mention that is because as a sales anthropologist, there was nothing better than sitting at the gate at the airport and just quietly just listening to conversations going on around you, because inevitably there was at least one, if not several of those conversations were sales professionals flying home from a client visit, and they'd sit at the gate, and after they call home and say, hey honey, I'll be home soon tonight, kiss the kids for me, and they do that. Now, I didn't try to listen to that, but then inevitably either right before that, right after that was the call to the manager to do the debrief on the client visit, and I guarantee you, I was like, tell me more. It's like you can learn a lot about sales by just sitting at an airport gate listening to conversations. There you go.
Oh yeah, I love doing that sort of stuff as well. I really do. I'm not upset about being a salesperson, actually, although it's interesting. I asked this question. I don't need to ask you in a sense, because you've already answered it. But the second question I ask in my podcast is what you're doing now what you expected to be doing when you were 16? And I think I've only had one person say, yes, I'd always intended to be in sales. And the only other person I know that always intended to be in sales is me.
That's
right.
Funny.
And and I really the greatest compliment anyone's ever paid to me in my working life, and it's happened twice actually, is to say he was the best salesperson or best salesman, as you used to say, I ever met. And I thought that is a hell of a compliment.
Yeah.
And no one said that for quite a long time, which I'm not sure if that's a reflection of where I'm going with my career, but it's a lovely compliment. And that's it, because salespeople are enormously competitive. They're a bit like, for me, it's a competitive sport, you see. That's the thing. Yeah. I think that's why it's so interesting to watch and study how we behave.
Well, it's interesting because it's got that kind of, alpha male, testosterone driven, boiler room-esque sort of beat everyone, so you can go to Cancun or the Gold Coast or whatever and get your Lucite trophy. As I said, salespeople love their trophies, right? So it's but the I say that with love, by the way. But I think it's a real shame in one certain way, which is, as we all know, right, the sales profession has a serious branding problem, right? It's not like you go to the family reunion and declare with great pride, I'm in sales, which is really unfortunate because the thing that I've learned in my career, because again, keep in mind, I was an academic for 15 years, making $900 a month of living in poverty. And I still pay the price today at 55 for those 10, 15 years of earning potential that I basically forewent. Is that a word? Foregoed? But anyway, because what no one tells you in undergrad is like, ooh, sales. Like, why would you want to go into sales? Like, I'll tell you why you want to go into sales, because you can make serious money going into sales and have an incredibly rewarding career and have more work-life balance. You're going to work your butt off. I think you agree, right? But you have a certain amount of flexibility and control over your schedule that most people would be envious of, particularly pre-pandemic. Today is we have a little more flexibility today, even working from home and things like that. But back in 2017, I always found it fascinating. The only people in our neighborhood, this little subdivision here in Virginia in the United States, the only people at the bus stop at 3:00 in the afternoon picking up their kids from school were the only working professionals picking up their kids at the bus stop at 3 in the afternoon were salespeople. Everyone else was in an office somewhere doing their job. And it's not that salespeople weren't working; they were working their tails off, but they had that kind of flexibility and a level of work-life balance. And most of them are making 7 figures, or mid to high 6 figures to 7 figures. And I'd always look at them and think, no one ever tells you this. Like, I was like, why does this profession have such a bad reputation when like you tick down the box? It's like you get to help customers solve their toughest challenges and make a lot of money, at least if you're good at it. There's nothing but almost endless upside, and you've got a certain amount of flexibility. Yes, you're going to work hard, but you work hard in any job. It's kind of fascinating to me.
I agree. I've had a great living out of it. I've no complaint. I mean, plenty of complaints, but not about this.
Well,
don't get me started.
Or looking slightly differently, there's going to be complaints about any job because it's a job. You know what I mean? But you have to choose. This is not a bad choice. I'm with you.
It's not a bad choice at all. It's not a bad choice at all. So when I interviewed Matt, your co-author of both those great books, he's written a new book, as you know, called Jolt.
Yep.
Which really he's trying to bridge the gap, I suppose, to some extent between the Challenger sale, which was written, in 2011? The Challenger customer, 2014, was it?
Yep, that's right.
Yeah, and obviously a lot of things have changed since then.
Yeah.
I mean, not least, a hell of a lot of things have changed. Just, from a technology point of view, from a political point of view, from an economic point of view. So I guess what my listeners going to be really interested in is getting your perspective on that and what you think the future looks like and how we should be addressing the different landscape now as professional salespeople, which is why it seems that buyer-centric selling and really understanding your customer, even more than perhaps we did when you guys wrote the Challenger customer, is something to focus on now. Is that something which is important?
I think it is. When you talk to, I do a lot of sales kickoffs and keynotes and things like that to this day. And we're heading into the Q1 of the calendar year. So we all, at least in the United States, we make the great migration to Orlando and Phoenix, right? But so somewhere warm, and we get on stages and we talk about the coming year and do the product training and all that kind of stuff. And inevitably, I find at a lot of those meetings, at a lot of companies, because we all have a theme. There's always a theme like, persevere or, win at all costs. No, that's not it. That's a horrible theme. That's not the theme. But but more often than not, that theme is something about customer. So the year of the customer 360, customer centricity, where you revolve around the customer. And then you sort of just peel back the onion just a little bit and look at what these companies are doing in the name of customer centricity or being more customer centric. And it's about get them to buy more of our stuff or show them that we're really smart or, help them understand our differentiators. And what you find is it's a lot of supplier centricity in the name of customer centricity. It's like this thin veneer of the customer's important. Don't forget them. Now, enough about you. Let's talk about me some more. Right? It's So I think when I talk about customer centricity and being more customer centric, I think the better way to think about it is actually not to be so much customer centric, but supplier agnostic, which is to literally
hold on.
Somebody write that down. That's good stuff.
I got to write this down now.
Yeah.
So,
and this is
talking.
Really,
hold on a second. But now I'm going to have to challenge you on challenging. Actually, that is my one issue, by the way, with the Challenger sale.
Okay. I bet it is because it's everybody's issue with the Challenger sale. Yeah, but keep going.
Well, my issue with the Challenger sale is not an issue for me personally because I think the Challenger style of selling suits people like me that enjoy confrontation. You tell me if I'm wrong. Whereas I think most people don't. But that's a different topic, possibly.
Yeah, we could talk about that too. But tell me about the supplier agnostic. I clearly hit a chord there, Kevin. So tell me.
You did hit a chord because I think what you're saying is, if I'm right, you're saying as a vendor, I should be supplier agnostic.
You should be. Well, you should be agnostic to the goal. All right, so basically, I think where you're going to go, because this is where everybody goes, is like, what am I going to go in the free consulting business? How do I actually get paid? Right? That's the question.
I guess that's where I'm going. You saw me coming.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I've had this conversation, right? So, but at the heart and soul of Challenger, for example, was in fact this supplier agnostic idea, which is if you show up to your customer virtually, in person, whatever, but if you engage your customer in such a way that you're challenging their thinking, showing them a new way to save money, to make money, to mitigate risk that they didn't even know was possible, right? You're teaching them something not about your business, but you're teaching them something about their business. It's not about you and your capabilities at all. That's actually valuable to customers, because the thing that's because we all start with like, what's keeping you up at night? Well, I can tell you what's keeping your customers up at night. You know this too, because you do this for a living. What's really keeping them up at night is, what are we missing? What are we forgetting? What are we overlooking? What do we not know that should know? Are we following the right path? What are other people like us doing? Notice we could go on, right? We could make a list of 20 of those questions. Not a single one of them is about, I wonder if this supplier is the right one for me. That comes later, right? The things that are actually they're worried about now are supplier agnostic. They don't want to have a concept. So for you to show up in that world where they're swimming, marinating in all these questions about me, am I doing the right thing? Me personally, us as a company, and you show up and say, let me tell you about our features and benefits. The disconnect there is so strong that it's almost valueless, right? And that's, I think, what we all see. So to engage customers on their terms, or on what are they worried about, what are they working on, and then ideally to show up in such a way that you're just asking, can you help me understand what you're working on? Matt and I wrote a blog post for Harvard a long time ago. He's called it, the single worst question in sales is what's keeping you up at night. It's like, dude, if you show up to my door, and I don't know if I'd say dude to a sales rep, but like you show up my doorstep and say, what's keeping you up? And I was like, do your homework, right? Like, at least come with a hypothesis, have an idea, have a suggestion. I'm not looking for someone to interview me. I'm looking for someone to help make me smarter, to help me think of new ways to work my money. Now, just as footnote, because you put it in there, so let's pick up that pin. It was like, does that mean be obnoxious or be jerky or be pressuring? Or it's like, you're not right. You're not doing this right. Here's a better way to think about your business. No, that's really, like, so diplomatically, professionally, culturally correctly, the way you deliver a story like this, a message like this, is different in Japan than it is in the UK. And to do it with empathy, right? Because these people really are worried about this. They are concerned, or they're stressed, or they're exhausted, right? And to show up in that world and say, I love the phrase, I call it the phrase that pays. It's a little cynical, or maybe not, but it's a little crass. But the phrase is, in working with other customers like you. In working with other customers like you, one of the things we found is that when you start thinking about risk like this versus like that, it actually opens up these new opportunities to save money and mitigate risk at the same time. Oh, I'd never thought about that. That's what Challenger sounds like when it's done well. Notice none of that is like, hey, jerk, here's a different way to think about your business. That's Matt literally once said, like, we didn't call the profile the jerk for a reason, right? So, but at the end of the day, so Kevin, I still haven't addressed your questions. Let's come back to it now, which is, okay, so I show up with this insight, what we would call an insight, specifically commercial. No, but in the book, and particularly again, the second book, The Challenger Customer, we go into this in a lot of depth, because we don't call it insight, we call it commercial insight, which is insight you can monetize. Because if you can't make money at this, so then why are you just doing it, right? So what happens if I show up with an insight to the customer? They say, wow, that is a great way to think about my business. I hadn't thought about that before. I can make more money doing that. And they take that idea, put it in a tender or out to bid, and your competitor wins the business. That feels really bad. And you're right, that's called free consulting. And nobody made any money in free consulting, right? You can make a ton of money in consulting, just not in free consulting, right? So you could. By the way, go ahead.
Yeah, no.
You got me all riled up now, man.
No, I can tell, man. That's okay. Well, that's the other thing. Actually, I got out of the Challenger's sale. I think I'm right in. You're going to tell me if I'm wrong straight away. It's not actually a bad thing to interrupt your customer sometimes. Right. This idea that we should just listen to everything you say and keep firing questions at you. I think that was kind of like 1980s selling. Yeah. Things have moved on a little bit. So I'm interrupting you. Yeah. And I'm interrupting you with a point of view, please. A POV, which is something you need to have as a POV, right? As a salesperson, right. Which is what you're talking about. I completely agree that this phrase, in working with other customers like you and providing tailored customer insight, I think that's great. But it requires you to understand your customer so you can present another customer like you. Otherwise, what you do is you go out to see BP, let's say, right? Yeah. And you say, well, we're working with this little oil tanker company around the corner that they've never heard of. You've got to compare like with like, haven't you? So it requires you to invest quite a bit of time in understanding your customer's business, which is very appropriate for a large enterprise sale, which is really the audience that we're playing to on the Sales Code Leadership podcast. Yeah. So that's fine.
I'll tell you that it's funny because there's like a rant nested in a rant nested in a rant on your point there. But I'm with you at a high level. I was going to figure out, like, I rein myself. I'm trying to self-control, but
Oh
But
no, no, don't do that. We want you as you are, sir. We want you to be genuine.
Nobody wants that, trust me. But let me. I used to show up to work, and my colleagues say, "Oh, great, Dark Brent showed up today." But anyway, let me put a pin. Let me come back and finish the one thought, and then let's pick up on something you said, because I find this super interesting, which is about like with like. Because don't let me forget that, because there's something really interesting there. But okay, this whole idea of free consulting trap. The whole idea is in teaching you something about your business. That moment, Kevin, I have found in all of the work is in fact supplier agnostic, right? It's a conversation. It isn't about, let me show you, oh, so you got that problem. Let me show you my speeds and feeds or features and benefits. It can't be that, because that's not the conversation your customer wants to have. They're just trying to understand their business better. And so if you take all that product training, everything you've learned, and just set it over here for a minute and have a conversation with your customer about a new way to make money, save money, ideally you've come prepared. You can't make it up on the spot, right? This is the hard end. It's probably ill-advised, because what you ultimately want to do, of course, is have that conversation in such a way that you can get them to say, wow, you're right. I need to do this differently. I need to think about this differently. I need to ultimately take action, which ultimately leads to a purchase, right? I need to do this differently, but who can help me with that? And that's that magical moment where you look them in the eye and say, I'd love to talk to you about how we can help you that better than anyone else, which is a long way of saying whatever you teach your customer about their business has to lead back to your unique strengths. Right now, here's the thing. Here's one of those nested rants I was talking about. To your point about you really have to know your customer's business. Let's set that over here for a second. We'll come back to that, because the first thing you have to understand is your business. And of everything in Challenger, this turned out, and we said this logically. I can remember literally sitting in the conference room where we mapped on the whiteboard, like, what would have to be true if you're going to get paid for doing this and avoid the free consulting trap? And someone said, well, whatever you teach your customers got to lead back to your unique strengths. We all went, oh yeah, that makes sense. We wrote on the board, lead to your unique strengths. We put it on the slide. And then I went out in the plane and traveled all the world, started saying to heads of sales, of course, we all know this means you need to lead back to your unique strengths. And it was at that moment, Kevin, where they all started shuffling their feet and looking at the floor, and there was an awkward silence. And it occurred to me, you all don't know what your unique strengths are, do you? And it was like, and it was just sort of almost like I'll be super honest with you, almost in retrospect, like an arrogance about it, what, you don't know what your unique strengths are? And then you start working with these companies, you realize, like, holy crap, that's actually really hard. I mean, it's like really, really hard. I've watched companies all over the world struggle with this, because the question is not what are you good at, but what are you uniquely good at? You know, the two companies that I often use, just because everyone can relate to it, FedEx. If you sit down, and I've done a little bit of this, but you sit down with the company FedEx and their senior leaders and say, what are you good at? That list is long, right? I mean, global logistic, retail shops, planes at night. If you go to Memphis and watch their operations at 2 a.m, which I have, it's mind-boggling. It's a well-oiled machine. It's incredible. So FedEx is a long list of things they're good at. But if you ask FedEx, say, all right, now compare yourself to UPS, and now ask yourself, what are you uniquely good at? And that's when you run into this brick wall of like, oh, bleep, right? Because everything that FedEx is good at, there's, UPS has got planes, they've got trucks, they've got retail outlets, they've got their version of Memphis, right? And that's a well-oiled machine. It's like all of a sudden you start getting a little nervous thinking, oh, like we're a world-class solutions provider, Fortune 10, whatever. It's like, and this, by the way, it just gets harder as you go down market, right? And it's like, and all of a sudden you have this kind of sick feeling in your stomach, like, I don't know what we're actually uniquely good at. And it's like, how could you be a multi-bazillion-dollar company with a world-class brand and all these capabilities and not be able to articulate what you're uniquely good at? And then you come to the realization, oh, because it's really freaking hard. That's why. And so that turns out to be the key. And the challenge, by the way, I just real quick, the Challenger IP and all the training and in fact, the books themselves, they belong to the Challenger company, of which I'm not affiliated. That was that was sold off by Gartner in its own unit. So when I say this, I'm not trying to shill any product. This is, but that company still does a lot of training with companies around helping figure out what your unique strengths are, because that ultimately, if you're going to be supplier agnostic, it's like you're supplier agnostic, up until that point where someone says, okay, now you've changed my mind. I'm going to stop doing this, start doing that. Who can help me? And at that moment, that's when you start being supplier centric. But up until that point, it's not being customer centric, because every time we talk about being customer centric, we just wind up being supplier centric with a thin veneer of customer on top of it.
Well, here's the thing. And my business, by the way, my business at Sales Code is predicated on this hypothesis, as you would say. Because I absolutely agree with what you're saying. Actually, what I do is my business is about making your sales force your unique differentiator. right?
Yeah.
Because and that's really,
that's
I think,
good.
what
I
we're
like
going
that.
to.
Yeah.
Right, because actually it's the one thing you can't replicate and duplicate as human beings. I know we're going to try with AI,
Yeah.
but it's reality. It's going to be a long time before interesting conversations like this are going to happen on AI. So there's one thing we can say. It's not so much now what you sell, because, and especially in the tech sector, there's so much competition. There's very little that's really unique. It's what we can say is it's how you sell which makes the difference.
Yeah. Let's so much to talk about. That really gets into like, how is the world different today than it was when the Challenger work came out? Let me, just because it's like a burr in my side, it's bugging me. I want to come back to it real quick if I could, which is this idea of you have to know your customer really, really well. I would just, first of all, just like to address that and say, yep, you're right. So not only, in fact, we say this in the book, and I've said it a million times on stage, not only does it mean you have to know your customer well, if you want to do Challenger, it means you actually have to know your customer better than they know themselves. Right. Mm-hmm. The bar is actually higher. So to be able to go in and say, here's something about your company you haven't thought about. Right. Now it's not everything about their company. It's within that narrow band of your specialty, because that's the whole idea. As a supplier, as a company, if I'm going to ask you for tens, hundreds, millions of dollars, pounds, euros of your money, I better have some kind of unique expertise that helps your company. Otherwise, what am I even doing there? Right. I mean, so have that expertise, bring that expertise, and share with the company what you know about how they operate that can help them be more effective. And if you're not sure, then go talk to your colleagues and your marketing team or somebody. And you want to be crystal clear on what those unique strengths are, and how they apply to that particular company. But the other thing is, I told you it was nested rants. It's your point about, so I need to know like to like. If I'm going to say other companies like you, then I need to have, so if I'm going to sell to FedEx, I better know what UPS is doing, right? So, maybe. Here's the thing. You tell me if I'm wrong. Virtually every customer conversation starts with 2 points, it seems, every time. I did one of my breakdown videos on this last week, or 2 weeks ago, which they're on YouTube. It's called Brent's Breakdown. It's a weekly series I did while I was still at Ecosystems. But the 2 points are these. Every company will start with, we want to know what other companies like us are doing, right? Mm-hmm. It's this weird, insatiable desire of benchmarking and like and you know what it is? It's Kahneman talks about this. It's social proof. It's a very human thing. It isn't a business thing. It's a human thing. I want to know what other people or in this world, what other companies like us are doing. The funny thing though is, somewhere within the next 3 minutes, they will utter the words, "Yeah, but at our company we're really different." Yeah. Right? Because every executive is deeply convinced that their company is somehow so unique, is a snowflake, is completely different than every other company. Mm-hmm. But it's like, but you just asked me what other companies like you are doing, and now you tell me that you're not like any other company in the world, right? And so what I have found, particularly at CEB, because my job as an advisor was to be on the phone with a high-tech company, and an hour later I'd be on the phone with manufacturing, and an hour later I'd be on the phone with the head of sales of pharmaceuticals. And I always found it fascinating, Kevin, because everyone would start with, at our company we're totally different, and then they'd proceed to ask me the exact same question that those three other companies had just asked me, that were supposedly completely different too. And that's when I began to realize, one, they're not as different as you think, and two, we need to find those differences in non-obvious ways. So we tend to, in business, think about it in terms of industry verticals. So we say, okay, logistics companies, manufacturing companies. I like to think of, for example, particularly because I work with salespeople, I think about it in go-to-market models, right? So do you sell direct or indirect, through third parties or to consumers, or it's a B2B to B2B2B, B2B2C? And because once you start doing that, it's like, hey, building materials company, let me tell you what I just learned from this med device company, because they said the same thing, and what they're doing in med device could be super helpful to over here in building materials. And by the way, because it's coming from med device, you'll be the only one in building materials doing it. As opposed to everyone else is playing catch up. I want to know what all the other companies like me are doing so I can do it too. It's like, so you want to get faster at being behind? Why would you want that? Do you know what I mean? So it's like, I told you it was rants, right? But so I think to your point, I'd agree with you when you say we need to know what other companies like them are doing. I would be very careful about the word like what? So and in that one little word, single syllable, 4 letters, is your opportunity. That's your opportunity as a sales professional to show up with an insight to make because you know what that is? It's liberal arts stuff. It's what I studied for all these years. It's lateral connections. It's helping you see that you think I'm a unique snowflake and I'm only like these 2 other things. But what if I could show you there's a connection between you and this thing over here that you never thought to even look at? That's my value, to help you see a connection that you haven't seen before. for. That's lateral thinking. And this is why every sales professional, instead of a business degree, should get a liberal arts degree. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk. There it is.
It's a great point, because whenever we look at competitors, and I do this, right? I mean, I'm putting together sales training, sales coaching programs, and I ask them to rank. I always ask my attendees to the workshops to do some pre-work. It's pretty limited pre-work. Generally, it's like, give me your top 3 competitors and tell me how we differentiate against them. And they're always the same competitors, right, in the space that we're in. But the question you're posing is, are they really the people you're going to learn from? Or can you look outside of your immediate competitors to see examples of industries? Yeah. And I think that's a really good point. In tech sales, it's still quite a new, I mean, B2B SaaS is only 20 years old, right? Yeah. But whereas actually there's quite a lot of similarities, I think, in pharmaceuticals. I nearly took a job as a pharma rep like 30 years ago before I'd set off in the tech industry.
Those were the glory days of pharma sales, man. That was
pharma reps always used to know more about the drugs they were selling and what they would do and the efficacy of those prescriptions more than the doctors, because doctors were trained once 30 years ago and probably read a copy of the Lancet once a month, right? So
that's right.
It's a really good point, and thank you for reminding me of it.
Well, and what it speaks to is the value that you bring to the table isn't just, I was going to say isn't, but it isn't just your deep knowledge of that customer's industry, but it's your ability to help connect them to knowledge, to perspectives, to ideas, to insights that they wouldn't have access to otherwise. What you really are, so we tend to think of our role as a sales. Let me ask you this, right? So you are at the point in your life, like I am, where you could say, look, I've been doing this for 30 years. I've been doing this for 20 years. And so it's very easy to fall in the trap of, I've been doing this for 30 years. I've seen everything there is to see. Let me tell you what you need to do. We call that a telling approach, just to tell you, here's my opinion. As an expert, here's my opinion. It turns out that's a horrible way to sell. We actually had data at CB, which I wrote about in this article called Sensemaking for Sales. It's in HBR. And it turns out just showing up and saying, telling customers what to do backfires, because customers don't need to feel confident in you. They need to feel confident in themselves. So great, that's your opinion, but I don't need your opinion. I need to figure out my opinions, right? So the better role and that one is equipped at is to play the role not of expert, but to play the role of connector. And so notice when I say in working with other companies like you, one of the things that we've been surprised to learn is there's a different way to think about this, right? It could be the very thing that I learned by doing this for 30 years, but just by saying it like that, and ideally actually making it true, then what I am doing is I'm addressing your one insatiable desire, or more than anything else, which is social proof. I am not telling you my opinion. I'm connecting you. I'm giving you access to that perspective from other companies. Now, I may have to do some work to convince you that that company is like you in ways you haven't fully appreciated, that going back to our earlier conversation. But my role then is connector. I'm Switzerland. Hey, it's like, don't take my word for it. I'm just here. I'm not here to tell you my opinion. I'm just here to help you make connections that you otherwise haven't been able to make on your own, because I think they're valuable. That's a really powerful way to position yourself. And I would imagine you do this subconsciously and have your whole career. It's why you're successful.
Well, I'd like to think.
There you go.
But it's a very nice point, and thank you for that. I would say that I think the top salespeople are always curious. Curiosity is a wonderful trait in selling, and if you're curious, you probably have a real interest in learning, a genuine interest in learning. Yeah, as you say, not to manipulate people. That was old school selling. Yeah. Manipulate people and impose your will upon them, and I've seen that, and I've done it myself. Many years ago. I know how to do that. But it doesn't make you popular in the long run.
No, and it never works in your marriage. So for God, whatever else happens, don't try it there. But
don't try in your marriage.
Ooh, jeez. Yikes. Yeah. But the thing I always struggle with curiosity, because I'm with you 100%. But can I get you to be more curious? Is it's like one of these Gallup-esque innate traits that I'm just born with, or is it a skill? Is it a talent? Can I don't know, but I agree with you. I think the more curious you are, like, how does this even work? How did this other company do it? What can I learn from that? How can I sit around and do this all day? It's like, how can I extrapolate from this conversation interesting lessons that I might apply to some other conversation? this whole idea of lateral thinking, which is in fact a skill that you can develop, of like, okay, I've just given two things that have nothing to do with each other, and just go through the exercise of, but what if they did have something in common? What might that be? And if you can, and then in that is an insight, in that is an idea. It's like, oh wow, actually they said it like this, they did it like this, but the common denominator of those two things, ooh, I could distill out of that and synthesize that from that a perspective and share that with others. Again, there's something people used to say when the Challenger book first came out. They'd actually be mad. They'd say, "Look, you haven't said anything new here." He's like, "My best people are doing this already," and my answer was always, it was never flippant, but it was always true, which is, no, we know your best people are doing this already because it wouldn't have shown up in the data unless they were doing it already. That's literally how research works. But so when one hears a conversation like this, or when I say things, it's like, it's very easy, I would imagine, for your audience to say, this guy's not saying anything new. The best people have always done this. And I would simply agree. I would say, yeah, exactly, right? The question is like, how do we distill that and bottle it, export it to others and learn from that? That's all I'm really trying to do, rather than come up with an opinion of what I think good is.
Well, I know that working with sales leaders and sales managers, the best of them do not spend their time working with the bottom 10% of their workforce. That's the way to failure as a sales manager, isn't it? The best of them look at the best people in their team. They go, how can we raise everybody up to this level? What can we learn from these people? That must have been the way that you wrote the Challenger sale, by looking at the best salespeople and how they behaved.
That's right. Yeah. So it was literally gap to goal. So what we did is we took a broad swath of sales professionals. Originally it was about 6,000. It's now in the data set over at the Challenger company, it's well over 100,000. It's high six figures. I don't know what the most recent number is, but it's a lot. And just generally the original methodology was you take the rookie reps, the newbies, whoever you want to call them, you just take them out of the sample because it's unfair to put them in. And then you just do a gap to goal, and you look at your top 15% of sellers relative, in terms of gap to goal. And that gets a little like, which gap or which goal, and how do you measure it? So every company was a little different, but one, you can normalize all that, and there's statistical ways to kind of solve for that. But then you simply just start doing comparisons. All right, what is sort of the middle 60% doing relative to the top 15%? How are they? Where and what you look for statistically is just points of variability in the data, which is simply say points of difference. And then you can, off of that, run regression analyses and figure out, if not causality, you can at least figure out correlation. And that was a hackneyed way of describing sort of technically what happened in the Challenger data, but that's effectively what happened, right? So, well, that's one of the reasons I love the book, actually. I mean, I know it sort of came on the back of the spin selling book, which is also still a great book. And what's brilliant about both of those books is so well researched, whereas frankly, most sales books are just cheesy bullshit, right? But from someone like, that's why I'm never going to write one. I'm telling you now, I'm not writing a sales book, because I'm sure it would have some value to people that thought I was, worth listening to for a bit, but I wouldn't have the resources to do objective research, which is what's important to get to the real facts of it, because otherwise it's all opinion, right? And that's valuable to a point of view, but. Well, it's opinion / experience, and there is real value in experience, but it's, I tend to go back and forth. So I try not to, 100%. Many sales books are, in my 30 years of selling, I've distilled into 5 lessons. In this book, I'm going to teach you those 5 lessons and unlock the secrets of sales, right? So that's not me. I simply leave it at that. That's just not me. It's not what I do. Because some people look at me and say, this guy's never held a quota, which, by the way, is actually true. I've been on hundreds and hundreds of sales calls, but I've never had a quota. And I respect the fact that you have and I haven't, because that, to me, there's a moment. It's like I've been in every possible sale, and complex to simple, and every moment of the sale right up to, but I have not been the person to carry the burden of saying, if I don't get this contract signed, my kids don't eat. Right. And not to over dramatize it, but you know what I mean? It's like, that's the one. And to me, it's like that's the moment that makes you a sales professional. When you look someone, and I've seen this happen, we all have, you've done it. Right. And actually, now that I'm selling keynotes, I guess I technically am in selling, because I'm selling myself. Right. But but I'll never forget, I was at a, Fortune, whatever. It's a massive tech company that we would all know. We were out in California at the global headquarters, is one of the big ones. This is, I don't know, 15 years ago. And we were selling a renewal of the CEB product, and I was with our account manager. She was all of maybe 24, just still right out of college, brand new at her job, and we were renewing this contract at the time. So again, a while ago, it was $106,000, which and our normal price point was about 30, because we sold multiple silos and put together this little solution. So this was a 6-figure deal, which for us was a big deal. And I'll never forget. And I was brought along to be the subject matter expert to convince this very senior vice president of global sales for this massive company. Brent will bring the gravitas because we've got the seller is 24 years old. By the way, she was incredibly capable, and that's part of where the story ends. And we sit and have the conversation. I share research. Okay, this makes sense. All right, so how much is this going to cost? And I'll tell you her first, Natalia. Natalia looked at him and said $106,000. And then she didn't say a thing. She sat there and looked at him right in the eye, didn't blink, didn't flinch. And I'm sitting there like, oh God, here we go. And he said, wow, that's a lot of money. And it's that moment. You know this moment because you live for this moment, right? And he said, why is it so high? And he asked a couple of questions and she said, and she didn't back down. She didn't negotiate against herself, which I am guilty of every single time I do this. I'm the worst person negotiating. It's like, but for you, we could do that. Or let me ask my manager or whatever, right? And she didn't blink. And then he sat there and she sat there and I sat there just sweating and there was silence and then more silence and then uncomfortable amounts of silence. And he said, okay. And he took the pen and he signed it. And then we walked out the parking lot. And I looked and said, holy bleep. Oh my God, that was, it's like, here's this 24-year-old kid staring down this guy, right? It's like, now for him, $106,000 is probably like a drop in the bucket, but still, it's like that to me, that moment right there, Kevin, that is sales. Do you know what I mean? That's that game of like, God, I just had so much respect for her. And I still do, but it's like, bless, that was cool. And it's like, thank God that's not my job because I'd crumble every time.
It takes courage to do that, doesn't it? It does. It does take courage to do that. That's a great story. That's a great story. So what's your next project? What can you share with us without breaking any secrets? Where do you think work needs to be done? So we've got the challenger sale, we've got the challenger customer. We'll give him another plug because we both love him, don't we? Yeah. Jolt from Matt Dixon. Yep. What is next? What's the next evolution?
So I've just actually departed my my employer Ecosystems, where I was for a year and a half after leaving Gartner, and specifically to actually now I'm gonna sit here in my little writing studio, which is a way of saying the guest room, and I'm gonna try and crank out. I'm gonna crank out the next book because I've been thinking about it a lot, and it goes back to some things that we learned at Gartner, starting all the way back in 2017, and a set of themes and ideas that I've been developing with, there and at Ecosystems and since then and with others and talking to leaders around the world. And it's become pretty clear now. It's coalesced into essentially the way I like to think about it is if one were to write the Challenger sale for our time, what would that be like? What would that look like? And that's the book I want to write. And if you, without, I talk about this in various themes of this a lot, but at a high level, it kind of goes back to your original question, which is, the world is different today than it was in 2011, right? In 2011, if you wanted to stand out as a sales professional, in many ways, all you had to do is have a conversation with a customer about the customer, as opposed to have a conversation with the customer about us, right? The show up with insight was literally, we'd have debates back in 2008, 9, 10, 11, Kevin, around, wait, you're saying customers actually want to be taught? And the answer was, yeah, and here's the data to prove it. And that was such a mind-blowing idea. Now, fast forward today, and all sorts of different things have happened, right? So first of all, we all kind of figured out, actually, that does make sense. And that's, I think, why the Challenger sale has done so well, is it was lightning in a bottle. We hit that moment right when people realize, actually, this does work. But somewhere around 2015, I make this up. This is all apocryphal, but I love this. I love telling the story this way. But it seems to me somewhere around 2015, I think it was in sort of March, every CEO in the world woke up one morning, in the world, and they all looked in the mirror, and they all realized the same thing at the same moment, which is, I got it. I know how we're going to stand out. We're going to become, wait for it, we're going to become a thought leader, right? And so every company is deciding, and they raise this banner, said, we're going to become a thought leader in our industry, and that's going to help us stand out and be different. And we're going to show the customer that we've got these deep insights. And as a result of being so smart, they're going to come to us first, help them solve their mission critical priorities. And marketers, God love marketers. I do love marketers. Many of my friends, my best friends are marketers, right? But they looked and said, glory, hallelujah, I've got a new mission. We're going to make this company a thought leader, and we're going to create a strategy for this. We're going to call it content marketing. And all of a sudden, HubSpot and other companies said, hey, I've got tech for that. We'll call that marketing automation. And we're going to now, and then all of a sudden, all this data started coming from nowhere. So now I've got data and a tech platform to make good on a strategy that solves a mandate from the CEO. And we all just start cranking out massive amounts of content, not just content, but quality content, and spamming the world with, if not commercial insight in a challenger sense, then at least thought leadership and ideas and smartness. And I call this the smartness arms race. And the funny thing is, we all did this at the same time in order to stand out and be different. How ironic, right? And really, what's happened is it's the smartness arms race, very much like mutual assured destruction in the 80s and 90s. It kind of ended in a tie, right? So everybody's saying really smart stuff. And the only one to lose is honestly your customer. Because now I got your white paper, I got their white paper, I got this white paper, I got this video series, I got these 3 agencies, I got the Gartner out here saying this, I got 2 consulting firms telling me that. And it's all smart, it's all backed by evidence, it's all relevant to my company, but it's all overwhelming. It's just like, I don't even know what to do. And so imagine in that world now, Kevin, where I, having just read the Challenger book, show up and say, hey, but have you read my insight? It's like, are you freaking kidding me? Put it on the stack with the 15 other things, right? And so it's not to say that that's a bad idea, but the word that I use today for the world we live in today is context. We have to understand what happens to Challenger in the context of today's world where customers are overwhelmed with high quantities of high quality insight, or at least content. And to show up now and just say, here's another thing for you to think about. I know they're all saying zig, but we're saying zag, right? It's like, great. But they're saying zig and they've got evidence. You're saying zag, you've got evidence. They've got data. You've got data. They've got data. Experts. I don't know what to do. You know what I better do? I better study this more. I better look at this a little longer. I better spend a little bit more time doing research. Why don't you call me in 6 months? And of course, that means go away, you bother me, right? And what customers will do is they study more, they'll get more overwhelmed, they'll get more confused, and so somebody somewhere needs to do something to just say, to sit down with a customer and say, look, there's a lot of content out there from this company, from that company. Let me see if I can just help you put a framework around it. Let me help you just take this thing that seems overwhelming and make it more manageable. And in working with other customers like you, there it is, we have found that as you encounter all of this content, these 4 or 5 pieces are probably the ones you want to focus on most. And as you focus on them, here's the 3 questions you probably want to ask yourself to decide for yourself what makes the most sense for your organization. If you could show up like that today, not only are you different, you're actually helpful. And I think that is an example of what I call frame making. So if Challenger is all about being frame breaking, I think the opportunity, again, it's not like Challenger's dead, put a fork in it, but it happens in context. And the context today is if I can show up and not just be frame breaking, but if I can show up and be frame making and help put a framework around hard things like decision-making processes and buyer journeys and information and value definitions, I show up in a way that's actually, I love talking to Kevin because he helps me just feel more confident in my ability to make a decision. And that's then you land in this very human place. Like, Kevin, I love you, not just because I love you because I love me when I'm around you. It's like you make me feel better about my ability to make decisions around in the face of incredible decision complexity and with all these different stakeholders. You help me feel more confident in my ability, our ability as a company to make the right decision in the shortest amount of time that's best for our company. And you didn't just show up and ask me tough questions about what's keeping me up at night. And you didn't just show up with another insight. That I call frame making. And I think a version of that is, look, will the things that we learned from Zig Ziglar in the 70s still help? Actually, yeah, I think they will. Is spin still relevant? 100%. Challenger still relevant? 100%. But if you're looking for but how do I not just show up to be good, but how do I show up to be different and good? That's, I think, the big window of opportunity for differentiation today.
Wow. When do I get it? Where do I get it?
I hope if I get off these dang podcasts and start writing, I say that with love. I'm only kidding, but hopefully end of year, it'll be out by end of year. That's my hope. So stay tuned. End of next year, end of 2024. Sorry, not in 2 weeks. Oh my God, no. So this will show up. I'm portraying this coming out in January, as you said. So end of 2024.
You're safe because we're not going out until the beginning of.
Yeah, there you go.
Anyway, so you've got 50, sounds like you've got a lot of work to do there. Will you be using artificial intelligence tools to help you to profile and ask questions and do research and stuff?
Probably not. I will use AI a little bit for editing, because you could tell I bang on a lot. I rant, I speak, anything I could say in 500 words, I choose to say in 5,000. And so I have to your point,
words, though, Brent. They're good words.
They are so many of them, though. Yeah. I write and I speak in a very Baroque way. I like to put lots of filigree on things, right? So I have found AI is actually super helpful for me. It's like how do I say this in half as many words and it's still pretty good? So that's at least as a writer.
Got the time. Yeah. You've got to curate the content. Those words have got to be punchy, man. You've got to eat your own dog food. I think that's the phrase.
That's what everybody tells me. I know. I just don't. There is no room in the world for someone like me, Kevin. I think it's just put me out the pasture. Well, let AI do my job.
Let me give you a cheesy segue.
Yeah.
There's room for you on the Sales Code Leadership podcast. It has been an absolute pleasure. Time has raced by us, I'm afraid, Brent, but thank you so much for your time.
You are welcome. We'll do it again.